Hi everyone, thanks for joining us today.
It does sound sophisticated.
Sophisticated, yeah.
With the ACE community for 3 years now.
Actually outlined everything.
Something that we find in the society.
First, talk about the problems that you're trying to solve.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for another episode of Deep Random Talks. Today we have an awesome guest, Elissa, with us, and my awesome co-host Moien, where we're going to talk about another fundraising topic. This time about raising funding for a hardware deep tech company in Canada. So thanks for joining me, Elissa and Moien. So what's new with you, Elissa, these days?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. What's new is I just got back from Frankfurt for a big 3D printing trade show, which was super exciting. Great to be there, kind of a launch for our company, but also just to rejoin the industry after all this time stuck in isolation. So feeling energized by the experience.
Beautiful. And you said it was a huge conference with robot dogs, and yeah, what was going on there?
Yeah, there was at least one robot dog,
Okay.
but there were also just people who brought in their massive 3D printers. Everyone's showing off their new hardware, new software, and of course, all the amazing things that they have 3D printed. And everyone was wearing 3D printed shoes. So it was a very fun time.
So we should all expect that coming up soon then in the markets. I guess there
Definitely.
are some already anyway. So I guess you dropped a bit of a hint about the topic of what your startup is working on in the 3D printing space. But let's hear from Moien as well. What's new with you, Moien?
Definitely not as exciting as what Alissa experienced over the past couple of weeks, but it's going well. We're continuously looking for amazing startups and technologies to fund, and that's by itself is a great journey. It's the same old, looking for great companies.
Beautiful. And I guess for me, I'm in Australia. I've been here for a couple of weeks. I've been waking up at 3 a.m. every day to take my afternoon meetings at least. But it's been fun. It's raining a lot, but at least it's not snowing like it is in Toronto now. So what are you all drinking? I'm having good old water right now.
Me too. Magical elixir of life here. Water.
Nice.
Have black tea.
Okay.
That one is more exciting for me.
Sounds good.
Amir, have you seen any koalas in Australia yet?
We did. We were on a road trip, and a koala was just walking across the road. So we just arrived when it was just climbing a tree. I have a short video. I will send it to you.
That's very cute.
Yeah. On that note, let's move on to the topic of the conversation. So, Elissa, tell us a little about yourself. So right now you are working in, your own venture, but before that you were working as a consultant for a while. So take us back there, what was happening in your life there?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm actually a mathematician by training. So I have a PhD in mathematics. And after I finished my doctorate, I went on and became a consultant. So my background is in geometry, and I ended up working at a very small consulting firm here in Toronto, doing geometry consulting, which is a pretty niche activity, but it turns out a lot of people have geometry problems. So we were solving problems in architecture, engineering, manufacturing, and sometimes art, sometimes science, all over the place, really. But it was definitely a consulting firm, so working on people's problems as they come up. And yeah, we got working on a manufacturing project actually in the 3D printing space about 5 or 6 years ago. And that's what led to some of the insights about the problem that we are now solving with our, we're trying to solve anyway with our new company. So actually the company started in 2012 and it was started by my co-founder, Daniel, co-founder in the current company. So he started this consulting firm. And that was really the time when a lot of people were doing these large scale architecture projects with a lot of glass and steel. But there's a ton of work that needs to be done with just figuring out the details of how those facades should be constructed, what the measurements are, how to deal with we did a project putting solar panels on a curved roof, and the big issue there was how to make it so that birds don't nest under the panels. You need to keep tight gaps between every pair of adjacent panels, and it's a huge kind of almost bowl-shaped roof.
Beautiful. And you said, through that kind of projects you were working on, you came across the problem.
Yeah, so the problem is in trying to do manufacturing with 3D printing, and you're not using 3D printing as a way of doing conventional manufacturing. You're trying to really do something new with 3D printing that you can't do with conventional um, subtractive manufacturing or injection molding or something like this. So in particular, this was a company that was making a consumer product that had a lattice geometry. So I can share a picture with you, but just, a very complex periodic structure, mostly air, but the geometry of these little bars, the little pattern, is incredibly important and gives it mechanical properties. So what those mechanical properties are, and how do you find the right geometry for the application? This took our client literally years, including our help, took them literally years to get to a product that they could then bring into the market. And so we really just got a sense of how difficult it is to use 3D printing in this way, to realize complex geometry and create products with it. That's really the problem we're trying to address.
We can enter the current kind of day and age now that you're working on Metafold, and now that you have moved from the problem to the actual solution. Why don't you, I guess, give us a 3-minute pitch on what is Metafold? What does Metafold do?
So Metafold is a software company, and we make it faster, easier, and cheaper to get up and running with advanced design software for additive manufacturing. So our platform is design software, but it's intended for use with additive, and it's really intended to help people get the most out of additive manufacturing. Use really, really complex geometry that traditional engineering software can't touch. Like, it will crash your computer if you try to do these things with traditional software. And so we're, as you know, my background is in mathematics, and so my team has created or leveraged, I should say, mathematics to make all of this much faster and easier to do.
So the problem is obviously very fascinating. But the question would be for me that what made you to make that leap of faith to move from a consulting form of business to actually a startup? You could continue to solve this problem as a consulting business. Different businesses could come to you, but then you decided to actually make this software solution, make a product out of it, and then build actually a startup.
There were a lot of different facets to that process. It was not like a single decision. Took a long time to make that decision. I think, one of our motivations was having a broader impact. So being able to help one client versus being able to help a much larger group of people. That was kind of my favorite part as a consultant, is being able to unblock people from making progress in their projects. And we saw some amazing things get achieved through that, through our work. But with the software, we have that same potential. And that's really actually one of our visions at Metafold, is to unblock engineers, literally, to bring their frontier innovations into the market, because people are doing amazing stuff with 3D printing and they often can't scale it. And that's one of the things we address. But returning to your question about how we kind of made that decision, for a while we had this idea, which seems funny, but we had this idea that we would create these spin-offs, these little bits of IP that we would package up and spin off like tumbleweeds. And it obviously doesn't happen that way. Like, nothing happens without you kind of caring for it and shepherding it into the world. And so I think this was one example where we kind of thought we would just spin this off into a small product we sold on the side. And then we started to realize that there was a much bigger opportunity, and that we would also need to work much harder to develop the real solution to the problem.
So recently we started doing Creative Destruction Lab, and there are a lot of deep tech companies there. And I was talking to this person who was saying, I'm building this extremely remarkable technology that could have zillions of use cases. And I don't understand why investors keep asking, what's the use case for this thing you're building? So this extreme narrowing of use cases from a technology that can potentially enable many, many things is something that I had to get used to. It is very, very painful when all the external pressure is what is the one thing that you can do really well versus, my desire to want to be like, I'm going to change the whole world using this technology, right? So between the lines of what you said was a bit of that narrowing, it started from hardware and software and then go into software and probably, as you evolve, you probably will do a bit of more narrowing.
Wild. I mean, we did start right at the beginning of the pandemic. The ideas were germinating just before the pandemic started, and then we decided to make prototypes. And the way we dealt with this is we made a distributed hardware. So we made 3 copies of the same 3D printer. And the idea was that we could each kind of build it independently. This is when people were really locked down. And then later on, we have these great photos of my co-founder, Daniel, on a video call with a 3D printer. He's literally looking at the printer and trying to debug it on this video call. So it was very challenging. And that was part of the reason we did make the pivot away from hardware is that, there's so many reasons. Hardware is very hard, but the supply chain stuff that happened during the pandemic, was the kind of the nail in the coffin there.
You talked about IP and like the idea of let's generate some IP and spin them off. What is deep tech in your opinion?
We started out actually as a hardware company. We started creating hardware and software. We patented the interface between the hardware and the software, and we were using that to produce like very specialized materials. So all those things together, it was impossible to explain to anyone. I don't know, that should not be the hallmark of deep tech, but definitely goes along with the territory. And I think now we've pivoted to being only software, but I think what underpins our technology is this body of mathematics and fabrication knowledge and computational geometry that it's like not touchable by most people as anything in kind of highly specialized science is, right? It involves very niche expertise. Yeah, I'm curious to know, Moien, your definition of deep tech, since you are looking at deep tech companies every day.
The conclusion from our conversation was deep tech means different things to different people. But maybe an overarching definition and an easy, I guess, to swallow one would be a project, a venture that someone right out of school who knows how to code, who knows how to build hardware, without specific industry experience, research experience, can't really get into. Sometimes people talk about IP, a specific intellectual property, which can be a massive amount of data, which can be know-how, which can be a patent. On the deep tech side, it's usually a B2B problem. You're trying to be a clean tech company that's solving the carbon emission problem. Obviously, this can be partly done, let's say, by a simple software to manage whatever is going on, but there's definitely a need for deeper understanding of a problem and a solution that can go into it.
The definition of deep tech that I've been thinking about recently is the following, that there are individuals who have very deep domain knowledge in a particular technical area, very, very experienced in computational geometry. And that could potentially be a very enabling technology. And the impact is also kind of clear. Like, as you said, Moien, like if I'm working on a very complex clean tech kind of solution, the impact is clear. Like it's going to change a lot of things. But the path between this technology, like essentially the go-to-market path between this technology and that, potential huge global impact is very, very unclear and uncertain and risky. And I think, the food delivery app example that you gave, the depth of the technology is shallow enough that most of the time can be spent on go-to-market strategy and just figure that out and get to the impact relatively quickly. Versus a deep technology where you have to spend a lot of the time on the technology to even productize it, and then a lot of time to figure out the distribution and go to market to get to the impact that you can have. So the distance between, that impact and the underlying technology seems, this deep or shallow thing that we're.
I mean, maybe the only thing that I would add, which resonates 100% with what you said, is that a deep tech solution has the R&D risk associated with it, but when you're dealing with a shallow tech kind of company, it's basically just a business risk. And that's where that patient capital comes in, where like you really need to figure out the product along the way. It's not something that the product is just built in a second, and then you just have to go out and talk to customers and figure out what your customers want. That basically doesn't apply.
That's certainly a mistake that I personally have made, thinking that I can bootstrap a deep tech company while it requires a lot of money. And speaking of capital, how have you been funding your project, Elissa, so far?
Yeah. So like you, I thought we could bootstrap it. And we actually did bootstrap for a very long time, for I guess a year and a half, really, through our consulting revenues. And we kind of skated along with that. And we had some great people on our team who were working part-time, but they could give us some available hours. So we kind of worked along for a while. And at some point we started to try to raise money, and like we did absolutely everything wrong. What you were describing about the distance from the product to the market opportunity, how to make that story clear, that took us so long to understand, and I mean we're still working on it. So it was quite a long process to raise funds, and we did eventually raise a pre-seed round in the summer.
What were some of the assumptions you were making at the beginning that either turned out to be right or turned out to be incorrect? Either about fundraising was one of the things you assumed that you could bootstrap, but about your product, about your market, about your potential investors.
Like we thought, I still think actually our tech is so amazing. Like it's so cool. But I thought that it was so sufficiently cool that the rest of the pieces would just fall into place. And so if I could just show people how great this technology was, everything else would be clear. The way we make money, very simply, is totally clear. Except it was very, very far from clear, of course. There needs to be a very strong business case to go along with these amazing technologies. And as a technical person, working in consulting is a totally different kind of business activity. And we were used to putting together proposals and making deals and so on, but not kind of coming up with a business plan to sell a product. Totally different things. So that piece was just completely missing. How to size a market, how to go to market, all of these things. We were not telling that story convincingly to investors. So I think my starting assumption was that investors would care a lot more about the technology than they end up caring, because at the end of the day, they don't really care. Most investors anyway.
Yeah, definitely. I was looking at, I follow Risk Capital, which is one of the Canadian VCs, and the founders of Risk Capital. And Colin made a very interesting post yesterday, and it really resonated, which is exactly what you were saying. He was like very blunt, ultimately as an investor, I want to know how you're going to make me money, regardless of how deep your tech is. So the story that you're telling me should be about that, but importantly about how I can help you achieve that. What is this collaboration story that you're telling? And I think that's something that I have thought about for sure, but never really thought about it that way, in the sense that, when you're talking to investors, you have to have, this collaboration plan that, okay, these are the things that I'm going to do, and I need your capital and help to achieve them. And how, what are all these steps? So just curious, do you have any interesting stories, like, moments that you were talking to investors and you were like, oh, damn, like, I don't know much about how we are going to do this part.
They would ask a question and I would say, I'll get back to you. And then I'd go and like Google the thing that they just asked me, because I didn't know what they were even asking. I don't know, like, Yeah. The best one that I have though is I think the first investor we started speaking with was a European investor focused on 3D printing. They're awesome. We sent our deck through their web form, which is, like you probably know, it's never a good way to get in touch with investors. And then a few weeks later, they followed up, which I thought was surprising and promising. And it kicked off a long relationship with them. They were interested. They could see the technology was very cool. They could also see that we didn't have a lot of like business experience. We were very early, but they kept on asking us all these questions, and they would just make request after request. And it was just, they would say jump, and I would say how high. Like it would just went on and on like this. And finally, they came to us and they said, okay, we really like you. We like your team. We like your technology, but you guys cannot do hardware. You have to stop this hardware thing. And we went away and we had the signs coming to us that I already talked about. But it was still like we were really attached to this printer we had built. We really wanted to commercialize it. We thought it was so great. We did a lot of soul searching, and we finally came around and decided, okay, we're going to make the pivot. We're just going to commercialize the software. We finally went back to them with like a whole shiny new pitch deck, doing the software, and it felt like it was going to go. And they turned around and they said, this is great. I think this is really the right move for you. You know what? We don't really invest in software. Like, what?
I would add that the way that I know Alissa initially was that Alissa had a talk with our firm and myself for the investment purpose. And I have a 3D printing background, so I really loved what Alissa was doing. Went and tried to like convince my team that this is actually the right investment, but the stage was not a fit for us. And that's perfectly fine. It doesn't mean what Alissa is doing is wrong or what she has to change the way she's presenting this stuff. Because we had, I think, at least 6 months of back and forth as she was going through that process. And at the end of the day, if it's not a fit, it's okay. Like maybe the investment firm has just different risk criteria in mind. Maybe they're not risk averse. Maybe they are risk averse. When it's not a fit, it doesn't mean something is wrong with the company. And then almost 100% of VCs and investors out there get things wrong and they miss opportunities. So we are all human. Nobody knows what is right. You're just guessing this stuff, and we think we might be right, or we hope we might.
I've been thinking about investor-founder fit recently as well, which is something that I have experienced quite a bit. Moien and I talked about this quite recently as well in one of the episodes, where last year, when I was pitching to investors, every time somebody said no or criticized what I was doing, I always thought, oh, I have to go back and change what I was doing. And a lot of the time it was just simply them not being the right fit. So, and definitely echo what Moien said in terms of accelerators are the same. A lot of them have ultimately a lot of them are either investors themselves or investment deal partners with other investors. So, or corporate ventures or such. So definitely this matching of thesis and ideas should be very, very close. Otherwise, you're just largely wasting your time, or you're forced to pivot into waters that you don't really want to be in. So what was that like for you, Elissa? How did you figure out who the right investors for you are? And I know that's a work in progress, obviously, but
part of the reason that our current investors did make the leap and join us is that we had really complementary skills. And so their big skills were in sales and HR. And this is stuff like we didn't have any kind of sales experience of SaaS, like B2B SaaS specifically, and that's kind of their thing. So that was ideal. On the other hand, they have not worked with, I don't think they've done too much in the deep tech space. They're actually a clean tech investor, which is kind of maybe another point here. And that's, if you're working the deep tech angle, I think there's actually a very good chance that you're also somehow at least adjacent to clean tech. Because it's kind of the project of science, right? Is like making the world a better place. So in some way, I think many of us deep tech companies are actually kind of clean tech or at least close. So that was the case for this investor. And that's sort of what I think glued us together. So clean tech brought us together, and then we had these complementary skill sets and needs.
So, Alissa, I guess one of the hypotheses that I have is that deep tech founders, because they're not coming from business backgrounds, they might have challenges when they're talking to investors. And you alluded to the fact that you were probably not familiar with some of the jargons. But on the other hand, deep tech founders are super smart folks. They have a lot of experience doing what they do best, coming from engineering, science, etc. So they can pick up the knowledge required to have a proper conversation with an investor. They can pick up the business requirements to actually run a successful startup. And I just wanted to maybe dive deeper into, like, for example, just like having your pitch deck in mind. How has the pitch deck evolved over
the pitch deck is sort of maybe the most extreme example, because when it began, it was literally just like all about the technology, slide after slide of like product features and examples of how cool it was, and then a few little things at the end that were just a nod to the market size and the vague business plan. And now, through just so much refinement and conversation with investors, I think the technology slide, there might be a technology slide in our pitch deck that kind of talks about what we do, but it's like vague. It's really just talking about the value proposition of what we do, not actually how we do it. So I think that was the biggest evolution, is the evolution from being so product focused, like just what we do, versus the business case for it. And then in terms of how I picked up the other stuff, I mean, you're right. It's not rocket science. We can pick it up. So I think conversations with people were the thing that give you the search terms that you need. And then I did a lot of reading, a lot of listening to podcasts.
So you are the living proof that a PhD deep tech founder can actually pick up the business language, can actually successfully raise funding. And
one of the mistakes that I made early on, and then later, sort of, I guess you alluded to it, Alissa, as well, was that pitch deck is the story of the product you're building. But ultimately, very much like what you said, I learned that the pitch deck is the story of growth, the business growth specifically, and how that will lead into the investor making more money and we building what we want to build and see the change we want to see in the world, et cetera, et cetera. So, and that shift in mindset was huge for me. Like, being able to think about, talking to investors as the story about our growth and how they can contribute to this growth. But one of the very fundamental pieces that was still missing for me, and I had to learn that about myself, foundership being this journey of self-discovery, was that, I felt very uncomfortable talking about things that I was not confident about. If I didn't know the business side, if I didn't get excited about the business side, it was very difficult for me to fake that excitement, when I was talking to investors. It was very, very clear in my voice shaking, answering questions on the business side. So did you go through that journey? What was that journey of being a very technically focused founder to somebody who actually understands, can engage in business conversations and actually talk about growth and, all the business side of things? And how did that affect your interactions with?
Yeah, that is completely it mirrors my experience for sure. And thinking back, actually, one of the things I did in the very early days is I bought a financial model online. Like, it sounds so sketchy now, but I paid someone like $200 to make an Excel spreadsheet that is like, we were selling printers, so it was like hardware sales. And then I filled in a few things, and then away we go. Here's my financial model. But obviously I was never confident talking about that. And we eventually brought on an advisor. And I guess maybe that I should have mentioned this before, but the advisors, like the ones that are part of the business, not through an accelerator or something, but people who you've brought on for different reasons, those people have been so important to us. And in particular, we have a financial advisor and a kind of business strategy advisor, and those two people have brought so much to us. But the financial advisor, he eventually was like, no, you can't use this model you bought online. I'll make you a financial model. It's okay. And so he made the financial model. And I felt like we had these sort of biweekly exchanges where I'd say, like, can we simplify this a bit more? I still don't quite understand it. Can we somehow it's like streamline things, make it easier? And at some point he just said, Elissa, you have to understand this model. You have to go through and like really understand this line by line. You can't, like, there's no shortcuts. You just got to get this. And so I feel like I'm still working on it, but it's something that I did finally kind of really absorb that as a deep tech founder, you're so excited about your bigger vision, the technology, the math. But at the end of the day, you need to understand each cell in that spreadsheet and you need to believe it, because otherwise you're not going to be able to speak credibly. At least I'm not. I'm not. I can't act that way. So yeah, that was definitely a learning experience, but it just took the time.
So I have a question for you, Moien, here. So you've been on the receiving end of a lot of these pitches. So, and, Elissa and I are trying to figure out how to communicate what we want to do to, folks like yourself. And I know you specifically are trying to play the role of translator between folks like us and folks who don't even get the technology part. They just rely on other people saying, okay, the technology is kind of sort of valid, right? So from that side of the table, can you give us any concrete examples of when this is done right? On a high level, yes, like we have to tell you a story of how you and I are going to grow together, us as a business, you as the investor. But, an example of this done right, what are the top 3 components that you think that story should contain?
One of the things that I've seen very frequently is that definitely deep tech founders, and this is probably the same for other type of startup founders as well, they think talking about money and how to make money and the word money itself is just taboo, so they really stay away from it. But it seems like let's say the story of your deck, it has moved from being all about technology to one slide about technology, very high level, and then the rest allocated to how are we going to make money? How are we going to secure money? How is this going to generate you as an investor more money so that you can go back to your limited partners and give them more money, and this whole cycle goes on. So, and that's definitely something that we have seen, and we advise companies to just think about how you're going to make money, and thinking about money is not taboo. And I think Amir has also a good story that, like, when we started talking about this stuff, like, even if this is a social enterprise, if you can translate it in form of money, then you would see the real impact. I would definitely place the business model at the highest level. What is the business model that you're going to utilize, and the question of how is this going to make money? And the response to that can be, oh, this is a hardware sales. It's one-time sale, and I'm going to sell this to my customer. That can be another business, or it can be a consumer. That definitely gives the first data point to the investor that, okay, how quickly is this going to grow? And we all know that a solely hardware business obviously grows with some challenges. So I might need to be okay to stomach that risk to be able to invest in hardware business. Or no, you tell me it's a software as a service business, which everybody loves to hear because apparently it grows very fast. And I put in $1 and take out $50, and that's amazing. So that's the first thing that you need to definitely communicate. And at the end of the day, it's very possible that your business model doesn't support any of those. And that's just because the nature of the problem you're solving. Maybe you are solving a problem for folks who are accustomed to paying $50,000 for consulting every year, and they're okay with that. And now you're going to automate that consulting with a tool, and they don't like to pay subscription fees. So I think that's okay. That's perfectly fine. It's probably not going to grow as fast as an app, but it still is going to bring value. It's still going to have a multiple associated with it. So business model, top of the line. Deep tech side, we obviously care about that IP. What is it that belongs to you, and what is that secret sauce that you have, and why hasn't anybody else been able to come up with that? So that's very important for us, and that sometimes ties back into your competitive landscape. And then maybe the last thing is that most of VC founders want to know that this is actually not a small market. It's actually a large market. You're really solving a problem that a lot of folks in your industry have. And it's actually a real sizable problem, that an impactful problem that you're going to solve. It's very possible that you're going to solve a problem that is a small, and it's going to generate some revenue, maybe millions of dollars, and it can ultimately be a very successful business, and that's amazing. But then it just like comes out of the criteria of being venture backable. Again, if I put in $1, can I get $10 or $20 out? And the reason for that mindset is that I know that probably not eight, but like probably 5 out of 10 investments are just going to go to zero. So I want to make sure that I go in with that idea. So these would be my top three probably, but other iterations also work.
So another path that a lot of deep tech founders in general, but especially deep tech founders take, very much like us who are doing CDL right now, is going through accelerators. Did you consider that option at all? And what was your experience like there?
Yeah, so we've done quite a bit of this actually, and that's a good point. That's another way I learned a fair bit of the business stuff is through accelerators and through the kind of programming and the webinars and so on. That actually was helpful, although it's also painful. So yeah, so they're good. There's some accelerators that are better than others. We're actually also doing CDL right now in the manufacturing stream in Seattle, and that's an intense accelerator, but it's good, I would say. The mentors there are extremely high quality, and they're on it. Some of the kind of lower touch accelerators I have found also useful. Actually, Mars I found quite useful because it's quite curated, and it's you pull from it, whereas they're not asking stuff of me, basically. So it's kind of a lighter touch. There's another accelerator which I will not name, which we're part of as well, or two other ones that I find very bad, and the asks of me are so high. Like it could just take all your time. You could just be in accelerators all the time. And actually, this is particularly, I don't know if I'll call it a problem, but it's something I have because I'm a woman. And so there are a lot of kind of women in tech focused things right now. So I've actually had to say no to women in tech accelerators because there's too many of them and not enough women in tech, or I don't know what the issue is, but there's more of them than I can participate in. And at some point you need to, like, you don't need more mentorship, you need capital for your business, and you need to focus on building your business.
Moving from one accelerator to another is definitely not good use of your time. You might go into an accelerator, however high ranking, let's call it Y Combinator. You go into Y Combinator, and then you realize, okay, I'm a deep tech founder. The Y Combinator's top companies are Airbnb, DoorDash, Dropbox. I don't think Airbnb, like Y Combinator, is actually a good fit for me. And then like there's no shame in going and telling the Y Combinator folks that, sorry, we made a mistake. This is not a good fit. This is not a good use of my time or your time. I'm going to drop out. And that's absolutely fine because you're saving your time. So going from one accelerator to the other and all these mentorships, I think could be a waste of time if you have one investor who is on your case with you, helps you on a monthly basis, answers your questions, has the experience. That one mentorship is enough. At some point, you get to that like law of diminishing returns. Basically, you're just making tiny tweaks and changes, but nothing is improving because you talk to 20 people and they have different opinions. Because at the end of the day, no one knows what is the right answer.
Elissa, you mentioned a couple of times that you're just about to start your seed round. So tell us a little about that. What is the seed round going to enable you to do? And more importantly, how are you approaching this? I'm sure, there's a lot of learnings that you have accumulated over the time, and you're going to use those to do the seed round differently, more effectively, more systemized, rigorous, et cetera, et cetera.
So, I mean, some key differences are just that it's not our first rodeo. We've done this before. obviously the current economic climate is very difficult. So I'm concerned, I'll be honest. But I think what's really different this time is we have more momentum. Like from a business perspective, obviously we're further along. We have sales, we have traction. All that stuff is really going very well. We have a great team. But from the kind of investor side, I'm thinking about it more like a funnel. Like now that I know what a sales funnel is, I'm putting that to work. So building a huge funnel, at some point it is just a numbers game, and so building that up and trying to be a little more systematic, and trying to kind of keep everyone at the same place so that we don't have this version madness that can come up with different versions of the pitch deck, like try to move people through and condense it a little bit in time. These are the strategies I am trying to use. We'll have to check back in and I'll tell you whether or not they are successful. So yeah, but I'm excited. I mean, we want to raise some money so we can, just dig in for a couple of years and build on the traction that we've already established and keep going.
Investors have systems and deal flows and workflows to deal with you. Like they have very, very systemized ways of looking at deals and companies, and you have to match that system, because otherwise there's a huge mismatch in process, and you never are going to, like, you might get lucky, but most probably you won't. So definitely creating systems is very interesting. We're coming up to the end of our hour of conversation. So I would like to sort of, wrap up with our verdicts. What are some of the things that, either before this conversation or before these experiences was not very obvious to you, but, today is obvious. What is something that people should think about differently based on, everything that you've talked about? Maybe, Elissa, you can go first and then Moien.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think we talked about the difficulties of raising funding as a deep tech founder and the process that you need to go through. And I guess, yeah, just underscore that point that you will need to you can still think your technology is the coolest thing in the world, but you're going to need to learn to love the business side. And actually, I kind of want to come back to something you were talking about, Moien, about the taboo quality of talking about money, because it was actually, I think I heard this from Brian Armstrong, founder of Coinbase. He said, if you want to do something really impactful in the world, starting a business based on science might be the kind of biggest lever, like the most impactful thing that you can possibly do. And I think this has been a very useful reframe for me, and maybe it just shows how deeply I've bought into the capitalist mindset here. But nevertheless, I think it is really useful to think about it that way, that starting a business and commercializing these deep technologies, things that are hard to do, there are not that many people who can do them. And if you can do it and you can bring these things to market, you will have a big impact on the world and you'll make a bunch of money at the same time. So I think that's my kind of go-to thinking right now when I'm getting discouraged about the business or whatever it is. Just feeling like this matters. It matters that we do this, and I need to learn to love the business, and I'm on that path. Let me say. So yeah, that's my takeaway.
Awesome. I will just add maybe the fact that, as Elissa also mentioned in her experience, deep tech founders initially start with deeper knowledge in the technology. They love the technology, but as they're going to interact with investors, they maybe stumble upon jargons, stuff related to the business that they're not really comfortable with. But they're deep tech founders at the end of the day. They're very smart. They have done a lot of stuff. And picking up the business knowledge and the jargons and managing a business based on the technology that they have built is not going to be something that they're going to fail at when they have done the harder part of the thing, which is creating that technology, which is very complicated and sophisticated and takes nights without sleep. So they wouldn't basically fail just because they didn't get the business. With the help of right mentors, with the help of right investors, they can actually build on the technology that they have created and create successful businesses.
Most definitely. One of the things that I recently learned from Moien is that there is a need for more technical people to be on the investment side too. So on a societal level, there is a huge imbalance between those who have access to capital and, like you're saying, Alissa, people who can make a meaningful difference beyond just the next delivery app, right? But unfortunately, we spend about an hour talking about how founders have to change how they're behaving, how they're carrying themselves. But, definitely on the investor side, that change has to also happen to bring us closer to a meeting point where meaningful changes beyond, the next cute little app can happen, right? So, and that's something that I had not thought about before. And, when I started talking to Moien about why he went from, what he was doing before, like an accelerator to the investment side, was very inspiring because, he said, I wanted to help more technical founders communicate with business side. But also another very interesting thing was that, he said that there are more technical people who build these kind of companies, exit and become investors. And these are people who have the understanding of the technical side and the business side. They straddle both sides. And, very much like we were saying, we need more underrepresented investors who focus on underrepresented people. We need more women investors. We need also more technical investors, people who come from engineering backgrounds. Some of my best investor conversations has been with people who have the technical background to engage in a conversation with me versus somebody who is immediately like, what's your exit strategy? And blah, blah, blah. Like those are all the questions they can really ask to engage with me. So definitely very excited to see, more technical. I definitely want to be an investor when I grow up, at least for a while before I get the bug again and, build something else. And part of the reason is exactly that, because, I think, more technical people are needed on that side to enable projects like Elissa's that will have a meaningful impact in the world. So if you're a technical person out there with a bug for building something, please do it. You're responsible to do that, as Elissa said, because you can do it. You should do it. And, don't fear the journey. It is hard, but possible. Thank you so much for listening to us for the past hour. Thank you so much, Elissa, for sharing your journey. And Moien, as always, sharing your insight from the other side of the table. And hope to see you for the next episode. Thanks for joining us.